What I want to do very, very generally in this video is consider the question, how do we study astrophysics and astronomy? So how do we study astronomy? So for instance, when scientists say that we've discovered a galaxy this many million light years away, and there are this many stars in it, and it has a mass of this. How do we actually get those values? How do we measure things that are so far away? Because the first thing that we notice is that for anything outside of the solar system, we can't actually go there. For instance, this picture right here is of a spacecraft called Voyager 1, which was launched in 1977 and is right now 18 billion kilometers away. 18 billion kilometers away from the Earth. It is the farthest the farthest object made by humans away from the Earth. And it's traveling right now at 17 kilometers a second away from our solar system. But even with this object, it's going to take tens of thousands of years to come anywhere close to any other stars. So we can send probes to the other planets and to take closer looks at the sun, but anything outside our solar system, we really have the technology just isn't there to be able to go to these places. Maybe in a few hundred years, but I don't even know about that. So if we can't go there to study things, then we're going to have to see how these distant systems send some kind of information to us. And the obvious thing that we can see when we look up right in the night sky is that these distant objects, such as stars, are sending light to us. So we have a picture of these stars here. Any person can go out on a clear night, look up and see the stars and get information that there are other stars out there. But how much can we learn from these bits of light that are being sent to us from so far away? Well, the answer is quite a bit, and we can kind of identify this information by studying light in a little bit more detail. So the light that we see, we see this the spectrum here going from blue to green to yellow to red. All of this light is part of something much, much larger called electromagnetic radiation. So light is actually electromagnetic, just short form EM, radiation. And this radiation can have different wavelengths and different frequencies. You've probably heard of the different frequencies of light and how those different frequencies and wavelengths correspond to different colors. So if I have a short wavelength and a high frequency, I might have blue light. If I have a long wavelength and a short frequency, I might have red light. But this extends far beyond the colors that we can see. If we increase the wavelength and decrease the frequency, we'll eventually get into infrared radiation, the radiation that's given off by hot objects. We can have microwave radiation, the kind of energy that we use to heat up food in the microwaves, radio waves, which we can pick up by antennas in our cars, and longer and longer radio waves. If we decrease the wavelength of the light that we're looking at and increase its frequency, we get into ultraviolet light, which is emitted by the sun and can damage your skin on sunny days. We have X-rays that you can actually pass through soft tissues like skin to get a look at the bones underneath. And we have extremely high energy gamma rays, which are involved in radioactive decay and can be very harmful to biological tissue. So instead of saying we see just a single speck of light, we can see the entire spectrum of the light that's coming off of it. And if we look at the same objects in different parts of the spectrum, we can learn much more about that object. For example, this object here is the Crab Nebula. I got these images off of Wikipedia. This is the Crab Nebula as viewed by the Hubble Space Telescope, which you may have heard of before. And it sees the visible light that is coming off of this nebula, this remnant of an exploded star. But that's not the only light that's coming off of it. There's infrared light, which is viewed by the Spitzer telescope. We can look at the radio waves that are coming off of this object. We can go up the frequency scale and look at the ultraviolet radiation or the X-rays that are emitted by this object. And looking at this object in the different frequencies, we can see different structures start to appear. We know that different wavelengths of light are produced in different physical reactions, so we can get a bit better sense of, depending on how much infrared radiation is given off, we can get an idea of how hot the object is. Depending on how much X-ray radiation is given off, we can see different phenomena that are going on inside of this object. So using light, by studying this electromagnetic radiation that's given off by objects, we get a wealth of knowledge about what's happening to these very distant objects. And in the coming videos, I'll talk a lot more about the properties of light and how we actually specifically study these objects that are emitting these light. Now, light's not the only thing that's sent off by objects. We can have cosmic rays, where cosmic rays can be particles like electrons or protons that are emitted by very distant objects, and some of these objects can have exceedingly high energies. I think the record is one subatomic particle was measured where this single proton had the same energy as a baseball being thrown at 60 miles an hour. A single proton having that much energy. And these objects are given off by very high energy reactions. It could be a supernova or some other very high energy reaction, and we can learn about these objects. And just as an example, I have a picture here of one of the tanks that are used in the Auger Observatory. Where these tanks in this experiment have been spread over, there's 1,600 of these tanks spread over an area of 3,000 square kilometers in Argentina, I believe. And what they do is they look for when a cosmic ray hits the upper atmosphere, there will be a shower of different particles. There will be a high energy reaction and a shower of different particles that come down, and it's picked up by these tanks. This shower of particles is picked up by these tanks, and we can learn a lot about the rays that are being given off. So we can have electrons and protons in cosmic rays that are given off. We can have neutrinos, which are a type of subatomic particle that's involved in nuclear reactions that have the amazing ability to pass through almost anything without actually interacting with it. So we can see the insides of stars. We can see the neutrinos that are given off in the core of the sun, but don't interact with the rest of the sun and can escape freely and be detected by us. One area of research that's being heavily looked into is trying to detect gravitational waves. Which are a feature of Einstein's theory of general relativity, where massive objects which are orbiting each other, like a pair of black holes orbiting each other, they won't give off any light or maybe any of these particles, but they will give off gravitational waves. And if we can detect these gravitational waves, then we could not only learn more about general relativity itself, but we could also learn more about these distant objects. Now, on the flip side of observation, there's also computer simulations which can be done and which can offer us a lot of information. So this is a picture from the Millenium Simulation, which tries to simulate the early universe and how structure and galaxies and clusters of galaxies evolved out of the early universe. But when we do these, when we use these computer simulations, we have to be very careful, because what the computer simulation essentially does is you start with your current theory, which you may not be sure on all of the details of your theory. So we have our current theory, and we have some initial conditions that if we're saying that two galaxies are going to be colliding with each other, and we're going to simulate that, how do those galaxies actually start out? Like, where do they start? How fast are they going when they start out? So we have some kind of initial conditions. Which are pretty much just a guess of how could a system start out. What's your starting point for that? Now, what we do in the simulation is we take these two things and put them into a computer, and what we get out is an approximate solution. Generally, when we do computer simulations, the equations that are in our theory can't be solved exactly. So the computer makes its best guess as to what the solution is going to be. So for the Millenium Simulation, we started out with a guess of what the early universe looked like, and we had the model of our theory, and then we put this into a computer, and it spit out this picture, one of many actually. It spit out this picture of what the clusters of galaxies and what the large-scale structure of our universe should look like. But this is really just kind of a guess of how things look, and we can't really be certain of this without actually matching with observation. So these are very good in helping us make sure that our theory is self-consistent and doesn't spit out some completely ridiculous nonsense answer. And it gives us hints as to what sort of things should we look for to verify our current theories. So if we go through all of this theory stuff and our approximate solution is wrong, well, then we got to come back and either change our theory or change the initial conditions and come up with more realistic initial conditions to describe our systems. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about in this video is what I consider one of the most interesting aspects of astronomy, which is how we can use what we've learned previously in astronomy and the objects that we discover in the universe. We can use those as new tools to further understand physics. So, for example, the supernovas, the exploding the stars that explode at the end of their lifetimes, these have been used to try to measure the expansion of the universe. So these very particular objects, we use that to study how the universe is expanding, and this study gave us our first evidence that the expansion of the universe is actually accelerating, which very few people thought was an actual possibility. Or pulsars, these cores of dead stars which are spinning and kind of send out a lighthouse-like beam that we see as a continuous blip, blip, blip. It sends out that beam like a lighthouse, and we can observe this. They can use these pulsars to try to study gravitational waves, or try to study what's called the Interstellar Medium. I'll just write it as ISM for short. The interstellar medium being the dust between stars. So, and there are a number of other examples of this where we can use objects that we've discovered to further understand very different areas of physics. For another example, the accretion disk of black holes. When material is falling into a black hole, it heats up to amazing temperatures, and there are high energy collisions that are far more energetic than anything produced in any particle accelerator on Earth. So this allows us to get a study of high energy physics. So these are just a couple of examples of how, if you're very clever, you can use what you've discovered before to further investigate other areas that may seem at first completely unrelated. So I think I've gone on for long enough, but in the coming videos we'll be talking in a lot more detail about how do we learn as much as we can from the spectrum of light that is given off by a certain object, or how do we learn more about the cosmic rays that are emitted from distant objects, or how do we learn about the expansion of the universe based on supernovas, or some of these other applications of different astrophysical objects, using them as tools for further studying astrophysics. So all of those things we're going to look at in future videos.